So it doesn't seem that close. If more people will come, I hope they can come in quietly. I want to introduce the program for today. You can see I have a long list of experienced people that I brought in because having a test course in a school can be fine, reading books, listening to what the teacher has to say about testing, but getting information from the real world, from experienced people that have been working with projects and systems and testing for many years is, I would say, even better. So I have invited 3 guest lecturers. Heidi is the first. She's probably going to introduce herself, but she will have the enterprise perspective, so taking testing from the requirement perspective, and why are not just coffee missing, but why are there all these bugs in systems? I think that's going to be one of her focus points. Then we'll have Martin Settler, who's a former student from this school, who's been working as a test manager for 8 or 9 years, so he will have focus on test activities, test management activities. And then in the end, we will have Christian Nørling, who will have focus on automation, test automation. So that will be the tool guy, and he will also bring testing into an agile context with exploratory testing as a specific test technique. But first, the floor is yours, Heidi. We will listen to enterprise test.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, for being here this morning. I know it's still early in the day. Now, I come here to talk to you about what happens when things go wrong. Where do we look for the root cause? What is the cost of actually things not working? Just a little bit about my background. I work for a company called Cognizant Technology Solutions. Tiny company, about 170,000 people employed globally. So, and in Denmark, we are about 43 people. We're in a startup mode. We've been here for about 5 years, but in the Nordic region, we are about 250 local employed. But then we also have a big offshore arm, which means that there is approximately, totally, if you take all of it together, 1,100 people in the region. Now, my role here is, I've kind of got 2 hats on at the moment because I'm transitioning from one job to another. So my primary focus is to run the QE&A for all of the Nordics, which means quality assurance and engineering. And then I'm also responsible for everyone that works with process or quality consulting throughout Europe. So my kind of group of people is about 100 people. We have a budget responsibility of approximately $20 million US. That is what we're supposed to keep pulling this year. Cognizant is pretty much working with everything between the Earth and the Moon that you can think about in terms of software development. Anything within the software development lifecycle, we do it. Infrastructure, development, testing, automation, anything that you can think about, we kind of work with those areas. We also do a number of other things like cleaning, because we can go out and take this from companies to actually, they outsource to us. We do what is called financial and accounting, meaning that companies can actually put all their accounting to our company. So all those kind of things we actually do. Now, Cognizant is a very, very young company. We were formed about 20 years ago. We're a result of a divestment, meaning that we were actually pulled out from a company. So 20 people left an American company called Dun & Bradstreet and formed Cognizant. That was purely based on testing. So those 20 people did only testing. Testing in Cognizant pulls in 20% of the revenue globally. So out of the 170,000 people that we have employed, 25,000 is currently employed in testing, making us just the biggest company in the world within that kind of remit. So lots of opportunities, lots of things to do there, meaning that also the majority of our company, the people actually move around. So I'm currently employed in Denmark. but I do also work in the UK. I may actually go and do an assignment in Japan because I've got the capability and the skills to go and do that. So my speciality is that I work with strategic test quality assurance. So I've never worked as a tester. I've always worked with strategic test management, meaning that I talk to the CEOs, I talk to the directors in the companies, the IT directors, around how should you actually plan and strategize this? How do you grow your capability? How do you actually mature yourself? Now, my journey started somewhat very long time ago. Back in 1982, I was employed as a apprentice in an insurance company. I was a normal office clerk, working from that space into becoming a SME, subject matter expert, being part of the actual business view into software development. Now, along that process, I kind of misunderstood and I didn't understand, and I went all the wrong places with software development because I was just a business user. So I became trained as a mainframe programmer. That was interesting. I am no way a good mainframe programmer. Actually, I was quite bored. Now, nevertheless, at the end of this, I was introduced to testing. So in those days, we were introduced at IBM to testing, and there was a Danish guy called Paul Stolvinje. He was the one that trained me initially, and I was in love. That second, I was in love with testing. Because think about the power you have in that region. Think about the influence you actually have. It's phenomenal. You actually get the chance to say yes or no to whether a company should introduce a change into the infrastructure. And if you take this right, if you work it right, you're the kings and the queens. Okay? Now, worked in that space, got a really good idea, went out, started my own company, developed a software testing tool, which at that time, which is back in 2001, would only test internet sites, the connection points, the rules, all those kind of things, but also was really good at hacking websites. So I knew what security breaches there was, what a vulnerability was. I got all the way into a number of unnameable companies. So let's just leave it at that. By the time when one company said, we're actually going to report you to the police. We're going to prosecute you because you're a hacker. And I'm kind of, no, I'm not a hacker. I'm just telling you where you got the gaps. And that was when I kind of said, time to pack up. I'm going to do something else. So I went into consulting. And that was back in 2003, and I've been doing that ever since. And then about 17 months ago, I joined Cognizant. Now, in order to get to where I am today, I have worked with all these companies around the globe. So some of them you know, some of them don't exist anymore. But it's all been in different areas, it's different industries, predominantly finance, banking, insurance, a few technology companies. As you can see, there's also some international companies, so it means that I've been basically traveling around the world, seeing the world, doing what I love, working with testing. So, someone just fell down, fantastic. Now, throughout this presentation, if you've got any questions, please raise your hand. Don't wait, just interrupt. It makes it so much more easy and fun for me to do this. So yeah, that's a bit about my journey. Moving swiftly on to the next one. So, who owns the requirements? Now, 56% of all defects put into production is based around poor requirements. Ambiguity in the requirements, not clear, nobody really knows what it is that we're trying to achieve. Now, a requirement comes from the business. the business should actually know what they're asking for. Most of the time you would actually see that the business puts it on a piece of paper. We used to see they put it on the back side of a pack, but we don't do that today because it's not politically correct to smoke. But in fact, we still see requirements, one-liner in an email, and the business just walks away and expects it to go directly into production, and it works. Now, when a requirement is wrong, when it's not testable, when there's ambiguity in the way that it's described, it will actually create defects as it goes through the life cycle. And what happens is, as it goes through the life cycle, the defect gets more and more expensive to correct. So if we actually do what people normally in the industry calls shift left, meaning that we move further up the food chain in the V model. I guess you all talked about the V model, you understand that. Starting up here with the requirement specification, but actually we need to move even further left. We need to move out of the V model into the business and start talking to the business. Start making sure that the business actually understands what it is that they're asking for. So, as you see, in the planning and analysing phase, roughly around $140 is what it costs to correct a defect. That's not a lot of money. It's actually easy peasy, just do it. Kind of goes into a big gap, a big black hole when we go into coding, because no one knows what's going on there. And then we start unit testing. Unit testing, majority of the time, no documentation, it's exploratory testing, it's ad hoc, and it then comes out into the more formal test phases, but it gets more and more expensive. Now, I'm going to show you a few very, very expensive defects. Let me just start with a small video down here. And let's see if we can get this working. We're going to come back to that one.
Now you have their attention.
Now, this is just a few of times when we've seen money truly, truly wasted. They're very American because that is where we get people. They're quite open in the US. We're very close in this region. We don't talk too much about our errors. And we definitely don't scrap projects. We keep going to the end, no matter how painful it is, no matter how much money we actually spent, we never scrap them. The last project that was scrapped in Denmark due to the fact that it was overspent was in a company called States and Certain Forsything, where they spent 94 million kroners before they scrapped it. This was back in 1987. Massive money, massive money. Now, IRS trying to do a modernization of their system. It was packed away when they'd spent $3.3 billion. In Danish terms, that is a lot of money. Ford Motor Company spent 400 million on a purchasing system. That is just a system to go out and purchase the small elements that they need in their production line. 400 million. No wonder the cars are so expensive. The automated supply chain that Sainsbury went into, that was also scrapped because of not working. It actually works today. So they've gone back, they've done it one more time, and it actually works today. So those are some of the, where we actually just throw money down the drain. Now, let's go into some of the really interesting ones. Victoria's Secret. The commercial you just saw was a commercial that was run pre to the Super Bowl in 1999. Now, this was at a time where Victoria's Secret had just gone on the internet a year before. So they'd only been on the internet for about a year. The halftime during the Super Bowl is one of the most significant breaks in a sporting game. There's 111.5 million viewers. Of those, 44.6 million are women. Now, when you launch a campaign like that, you expect people to actually go and buy something on the internet. And they tested it. They just didn't test enough. They didn't actually expect 1 million concurrent users on that internet. So they went from having a shared service network to a dedicated network to actually avoid that. They went back to the Super Bowl last year and actually again was putting a commercial into the halftime, and this time it worked. 10% of the annual revenue comes from the internet. Now that 30 minutes, if it doesn't work, you can actually calculate how much money are they going to lose in those 30 minutes. It is significant. Now, the analysis of this is, it failed because of poor requirements. The requirements wasn't clear enough. People hadn't really figured out how many people will actually use this. Mind you, 1999, that seems like a decade ago. No one really knew what the internet was about, definitely not here in Denmark. But in the US, it was very much everyone shopping online. Now, use case failure, again, comes back to the fact that the requirement wasn't clear. Performance failure, infrastructure couldn't carry the load. And the infrastructure, we didn't think about the infrastructure actually being designed to create or to carry the load. Mm-hmm. This one. Where the fuck was my coffee? 6 o'clock on the 20th of January when I was in the airport on my way to Amsterdam. I couldn't buy a cup of coffee because the shops out in the airport didn't know how to manage this situation. Now, I wasn't the only one not being fulfilled in terms of my desires that morning. A lot of other people had it the same way. Gas stations, train tickets, nothing worked. And it didn't work for 11 hours. Now, the potential revenue loss, 300 million kroners that day. Luckily, they have actually thought about some of this. So the shops could go to an offline execution mode. So that amount wasn't really lost. But there were shops who didn't know how to go to offline mode. There were gas stations where they couldn't transform them into offline mode. So people did actually lose money that day. Now, this was due to a normal kind of upgrade that IBM had planned. It wasn't the first time. It's actually happened within the past years 3 times. I will bet you it's going to happen again this year. There is a trend. Someone is not testing correctly when they're doing this. Now, one of the challenges that we have here is that this is a big network. It is difficult to actually foresee what is going to happen. But, on the other hand, they seem to have some experience now. They should get better. So, insufficient testing, broken process, and systemic failure. And I'm relating the systemic failure to the fact that this is a repeat defect. And no one seems to care about that being a a repeat defect. Systemic failures are those that actually occur when it's in the organization, it doesn't work. So we're going back into the senior management, not taking responsibility, not really going in and analyzing, so what is the problem? Money is an issue in every single company that you're going to work with in the future. Investment is something that they kind of keep to really tight grip on, because you can't just say, I'm going to test from here until the sun goes down. You need to plan, you need to actually prioritize, and that is what they're doing. Now, the prioritization that is happening isn't necessarily wrong. It is based on the knowledge that these people have. The knowledge may actually be 4 to 5 years old. So we need to get people into a different way of thinking. The Olympics. The internet site that they were shopping on didn't really work. And it didn't help that the Ticketmaster was having really, really bad performance problems. It took forever, and they didn't clear the cache. So when they cashed in on the actual sales, they didn't clear that. So the system was taken down, and the relaunch of actually selling these tickets were put to a hold. So it was going into a lottery instead. Now, again, we're looking at requirements, use cases, performance, and infrastructure. You see there is a trend. Now, this one, it's not just the people outside of Denmark, outside of the Nordics who are good at this. We're very good at it here as well. Now, this again was something that they do quite frequently. They upgrade, it works perfectly fine. This day, someone decided to take the wrong version. So it's a human error. No one knew what to do about it, so it ended up first DSB actually saying you have to buy your ticket cash, otherwise you will get fined. Half an hour later, the transport minister comes out and says, actually I think it should be free. No one knew how to talk to the public. No one actually communicated what is going on. When is this going to be resolved? They didn't know how to do it. They themselves have calculated the direct cost of actually having that failure that particular day. 3.5 million kroners. So next time, they need to ensure that they have their procedures and processes in place. The use case wasn't actually quite defined for how we're going to do when we need to fall back. The process was broken, and again we had a systemic failure. No one in the organization knew who had the responsibility to deal with this. Now, RBS, one of the largest banks in the UK, they've had a few glitches. I've only taken 2, but they've actually had 5 in the past 3 years. And when we talk about customers in the UK not being able to actually access their money, it's not 2 million or 3 million. 12 million customers not able to get to their funds for 5 days. Right? One of the penalties that then came from that is the FSA required an analysis of what is really going on, what is the infrastructure, what is going on, what's the defect. Now, this didn't only hit RBS. That is now an activity that goes on throughout the UK. So every bank in the UK has to go through that. Another one in March 2013. Again, they couldn't actually get to their money. The first one has been calculated to cost the bank £175 million. It's not small money. We're talking massive money. Now, as you see, the spaghetti code that I've put next to it, that is one of the issues that we have in most banks throughout the globe. Banks have been around forever, and they started doing working with IT back in the late 60s. Believe it or not, those systems actually still exist. They are still being maintained, there's still changes put into them, and some of them, people haven't got the faintest idea what's going to happen when they actually put that change into production. Because it's absolute spaghetti code, it's a spaghetti infrastructure that's behind. So what is probably going to come out, and that is going to be, it's going to be benefiting all of us, is that they will have to start changing their infrastructure. They will have to start the way that they built their systems. So this one, again, requirements, user case, infrastructure, but also the systemic failure. One of the directors in banking in the UK, he's a former CEO of JP Morgan Chase, went out and said, IT in banking industry does not work. We have, as directors, as executives, made decisions that has put us in this place where we are today. We have ignored the recommendations that we got from people working in IT, when they actually said, it's not going to work if you cut that kind of infrastructure. It's not going to work if you cut the testing. Now, testing in most cases, when you read the books, people talk about or write about testing should on average take 30% of all the development costs towards a project. Reality is, we often have somewhere between 10 to 15% of the overall development cost allocated to testing. Now, that's fine, but, yeah?
Could you repeat the actual figure that was normally used?
30%. 30% of the overall development cost.
It was supposed to, what was the
10 to 15. Yeah. And even if we get 10 to 15%, trust me, the developers will delay the project. And they will delay the project because of requirements not being good enough. The amount of change requests that comes into a project because of poor requirements are exponentially higher the further into this kind of spaghetti code you get. So, even though you have your money, your timeline for testing will certainly be pushed. So, and I know that you're going to talk about test management and test automation later on. Those are some of the areas that we can actually save ourselves, but it's not all of it. Okay? Another one, which is actually a very sad, a very tragic one. Very much what's happening in Denmark today. But that was based on a decision that was made back in 1981. Someone did not test the actual data set that they pulled out. They didn't notice that they missed out 27,000 women in that. And today we have 10 women dead as a result of that. That is tragic. Luckily, we don't see them very often, but it happens. On average, the women who are sick today or who have died have been granted 500,000 in punitive damages. It's not very much. So, testing is important. It is crucial. Again, insufficient testing. Use case wasn't clearly defined. We didn't use use cases in 1981, but nevertheless, business requirements were still something that we used. Mind you, when I started, touching a computer was back in 1982. And that was a 3270 screen, green. You couldn't really put anything into the system. You could just look up. You could just go through it. So this was purely done by IT people. Now, the iceberg. Sometimes we have to dig deeper. Now, the cost of poor quality is in terms of the sales that we have. So when we go out and sell a product, if we sell a product, the poor quality is going to cost us 10 to 13% in lost revenue. And a product is not just something tangible. It's not just a copy. It's not just a thermos. It's also, if you go to your bank, your online banking, that is a product. Now, if those doesn't work, we're going to go somewhere else because we can. We will lose our profit, so they will be reduced. Now, understanding what is the drivers will actually make sure that we can provide better quality. Now, and that needs to go back into the business. So the business needs to understand and respect what is poor quality. I normally say the business doesn't understand quality. They can understand if this cup can't actually contain coffee. But they don't understand the process, the code that comes behind creating this. So a defect in the code that produces the actual cup, they don't necessarily understand that. But we need, as testers, and that is one of the tasks that we need to have, is actually to talk to the business and make them understand that is the consequence. It is not just about automation, creating scripts, running tests. It is also about telling the story to the business so that they understand it. One of the things that I've found throughout my career is that talking to the business requires a different language. If I talk to them that, yeah, I'm going to automate, 25,000 scripts, I'm going to use Quality Center to do that, and I'm going to do load runner to actually do some performance testing, and then, by the way, I'm going to use Selenium to do something else. I've lost them. I don't need to talk to them that way because they're going to go away. I'm never going to get the money that I want for actually doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I need to talk to them about, if we don't test this, if we don't ensure that the code works, who creates this cup, then you're not going to be able to keep the coffee in that cup. So that is where we're going to come from. That's where we're going to talk to. Majority of the time, we work with defects. We work with misrequirements. We work with infrastructure that doesn't work. Those are very tangible, they're very understandable, but there is, as you can see, there is a lot of stuff going on underneath the surface. So take something very, very simple. Allocation. So allocation of resources to a project. If those don't come in on time, the project doesn't get finished on time. Not getting finished on time means that we will not necessarily be able to test everything that we've planned. If we can't test everything that we've planned, we won't necessarily find the defects that are actually in the code. So being able to talk to the business and say to them, this is the consequence, is so, so important. Every requirement is an asset, which means that we can actually put money towards a requirement. So we need to calculate the monetary value a requirement has and say this is how much it's going to cost you and this is how much it's going to cost you if the defect occurs throughout the life cycle. And the later in the life cycle, the more expensive it gets. A very, very few number of companies actually work with putting monetary value towards a requirement. Most of the time, they will come up with a business case and saying, we would like to introduce a new product that will actually increase our revenue by, let's just say, 5 million over the next 6 months. In order to get to that perspective, they're willing to invest 200,000 because it's just a minor change in the current infrastructure. Now, how risky is that change? What is the expectation in terms of when it's going to work? So, day one after implementation, if it doesn't work, what is it going to do to your business case? Is it going to impact the customers? So if this change is going to impact the customers, is it going to impact other areas of the business? What is the cost if that happens? All those things needs to happen in the shift left. So we step outside the actual V model into the business and start talking to them from that perspective. So, the story of 4 people named everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. There's an important job to be done, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that, and because it was everybody's job, everybody thought anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody would do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have. This is very much the blame game that goes on once we get to production. Who is the one to blame for the fact that we didn't do, or thought someone who did, or everybody should have done? So, yep.
I have a question.
By all means.
Yeah, because I like the phrase shifting left
Yeah.
in the V model.
Mhm.
And then I was thinking, how about the agile movement? Because they're very much into having the customer next to you and
Yep.
you know these one-liner user stories.
Yeah.
And they think they have something interesting, right?
They do, and they do have something interesting. Agile is very, very interesting. Agile doesn't mean that we don't have to document. It very much requires documentation. The beauty of Agile, because Agile is fantastic, we get to get people together. We get to do things together. And we get clarification straight away. Once we've gotten that, we need to document that this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to implement it. And then we can move on to the next one. I've been part of a couple of Agile initiatives. And Agile works really, really well when we're talking kind of new technology, because that's where we can actually quickly scrap it. Where we would like to actually see Agile work even better is in the mainframe world. So the banking, financial industry, getting it to work there when we work with very, very heavy, old systems, lots of regulations that we need to adhere to. That's where we still have a challenge around Agile. But shifting left, get out of the V model and start working in an Agile mode, creating your backlog, sending your backlog through down through the V model, still works. So what I see is a lot of, we'll do Agile initial requirements, definition, specification, and then we go into the V model, because that's the way the organizations work. And then we get back out into Agile when we start testing. But at some point when we're going up the other side, we actually need to go back into some kind of formalized approach, very much depending on the industry. Some industries don't care. They don't have the regulations, but the majority of the industries that we work in, trust me, they have. Any other questions? You don't necessarily need just to ask towards those. You can ask me anything that you might think that I could potentially answer. I can't say whether you're going to get paid next week. Right? Okay, yeah?
You talked about that there wasn't any Danish failure lately in IT projects.
Mm-hmm.
What about the Danish police? IT system?
That is probably the only one, yeah, I forgot about that one. That is the one that was scrapped because of not being able to actually meet the requirements. They continued. What we hear about is mostly the ones that keep on pushing. So at the moment we have, well, Reisekort is a fantastic example. They could have gone to the UK, bought Oyster, because that's been in production for years. It works. We don't need to invent the whole thing. The police system, yeah, they could have bought that somewhere else. Could have saved the money. We've got, there was a Danish project as well, which was it handled all the unemployment benefits. What was the name? I can't remember. Amenda. Yeah, that was scrapped as well, and it was painful. I was part of actually developing the test strategy for that, reading through the contractual documents. Not a place you want to go. Yep.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
How do you estimate the cost of a requirement? Is the man hours used? Is it the price of the system you are buying?
There's two calculations to that. There is the cost of actually producing the outcome from that requirement. How long is it going to take? Normally that is best guess, because you use your experience and look at it and say, so how long do we think it's going to take? We look at the technology that we're going to work on. Is it going to be is it known technology? Is it something that we haven't worked with before? Is there any infrastructure? So the whole complexity around the requirement. So looking at the requirement from the outset, we start by actually analyzing the complexity. Then we put the risk factor to it, and then we start estimating.
Okay.
Now, the other part of the estimation is then to say, from a development perspective, this is what it's going to cost. The other is, what's the cost if it doesn't work? And that is where the shift left comes very much into the equation, because we calculate that up front. We start looking at how much is this cost, how much revenue is this going to generate? And if it fails, what is the loss that we're going to incur? Then we start looking at it that way as well. So there's kind of two calculations going on in that matrix. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
I have one too.
Just come on, shoot.
Yeah, she's something here like 5 minutes more, so it's now or never. So how do we achieve that language to talk to the customers if we go up the shift left? I mean, if we're not going to talk about Selenium and unit test cases and the language these guys have, I mean, is it a new testing role or?
It is very much it's a different testing role. Mm-hmm. I've come across so many people working in testing, and everyone gets really, really excited about their specific topic. I sit in client presentations, I would say, every day throughout the week, and some of them are really, really good, others are really like, sorry guys, you just missed the target. Because when we start talking to the client around automation, the intent, and because I'm sure when you can have the discussion later today, but what I see from my end of the stick when I work with the automation guys and we go into client presentations, is that they will start talking about how many test cases we can automate, what tools we're going to automate, and how is that going to work, and how can we maintain, and they get really excited and they talk a language which is very, very technical driven. Now the client is kind of blank. They close down because they don't understand. So actually talking to the client is understanding the client and understanding what is the client's need, and then get out of the technical jargon, forget about the jargon. If it's a IT director, he will be able to understand. He will be bored, trust me, because testing isn't on his agenda. Delivering the product is. And the directors who work in the business, they will look for the money. They will look at the money, how much is it going to cost me, how much money am I going to save, and how fast am I going to get this to market. Those are the three things that he's going to look at. He doesn't care about what tool you're using. He doesn't care about the methodology being applied, or the techniques for that matter. He wants to reassure him that it's going to work, and it's going to be cheap. Dead cheap. And this ain't cheap, trust me.
And then just before we meet this guy who's going to be excited about the tools, from again the customer perspective, are there any tools that you would recommend? I know we have Quality Center, that's expensive. Do you know about any open source tools? I know you had your own hacking tool years ago, right? Are there tools you would say would be good from a
it would all, so from a use, I'm not that tool fixated because I've got people who know about tools.
Yeah, okay.
I walked away from tools when I stopped hacking.
Yeah. Okay, that's why we have it on the agenda later. That's great. Okay, if you don't have any more questions for Heidi, I think we'll let it go. Maybe she's going to India or London or just to a business meeting. I know you are a very, very busy woman. But when you come home tonight, wherever you've been during the day, I have some wine, some wine for you. But now we have a question.
There is.
Do we have access to these slides?
We're going to get that.
Upload them on
the, because a lot of what you're saying, we can pretty much agree on. It's very hard to convince the management and clients to actually think about giving real thorough requirements. And if you want to tell them, we want some test cases and what should we actually test, that would be like, as you were saying, just one liner, we just want this business case, and just make it work. And then later on, it's a huge pain. Other than trying to use another language to actually talk to these type of people.
Very much.
Do you have any hints or something to actually enforce this?
So the way, let me try and, so before Christmas, I did an assessment for an Italian company. They actually called me and say, can you please come and look at how is our processes, how does it work? And you kind of go into the organization and you start looking at it and you think, there's something fishy here. You know, you don't get the full picture, so the iceberg, you don't really know what the iceberg is all about. And it turned out, when kind of digging through the various bits and pieces, that in August, as well as in October, in their normal invoicing cycle, they had, in August, someone changed the code for some reason, which added an extra 0 to all of the totals. Sending invoices out to the customers with additional zeros in the invoices wasn't very popular. Now, the company wasn't too keen on revealing that, but finally we got to it. So when companies start talking about quality, cost reduction, faster time to market, it's about probing, it's about asking questions. What is the motivation? What is the objective? What is the pain that you're actually feeling? Because they're all feeling pain. There's a reason why they want to reduce cost. There's a reason why they want to get to faster time to market. So it's actually, it's very much about get your foundation in place and then start stepping out of the testing world into the business. Then you can begin and talk to them in a language that they understand.
So it's almost a cultural shift.
It is very much a cultural shift. So, yeah.
Could you give just a quick estimate of how much do you think it would take in cost to make a new banking system that would work?
Rough estimate.
Just a rough estimate.
There's a billion mark.
Well, let me try and answer your question this way. We don't know how much it's going to cost because it would depend on the bank. But the newest brand on the block in the banking industry in Denmark is Saxo Bank. Now, they don't have any legacy systems. They haven't been around for many years. It was actually two guys. One is an IT guy, another one a financial guy, sat down and think, we're going to start a bank. Now, they've been very, very successful in doing that. So what they have is a bank in a box. So they decided on developing the actual legacy system and then just go out and roll it out one by one by one. And they've done that in all the countries that they are, and then combining them. So the banking license costs 10 million kroners. The system from scratch would probably cost somewhere between 10 to 30 million to develop. So it's not that expensive.
But I was thinking more like you showed us this.
Yeah, the RBS bank, yeah.
Infrastructure. All banks are sort of connected to.
Yes.
So that they can do overnight calculations and such, and then they send an answer back to each other, which transactions went through and which one.
The clearing system. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That system is still running on those old servers, and nobody knows how to maintain them and how they work. Do you think they will ever do something?
So when it comes to the clearing and the SWIFT emulators that they use to actually clear the transactions between the banks, that actually works really, really well.
Okay.
It's inside the banks, it's the problem.
Okay.
Because these are highways, so it's like going on a highway from one end to another, and they have, kind of touch points they have to go through. So every single bank in Denmark goes through the national bank. So when they clear through the night, it goes through there and out the other end. It's the same if you look at Europe. So the national bank is connected to Frankfurt, where you've got the European bank, and the European bank is then connected to the other banks, the other national banks in Europe. So that system is very, very crisp. It works. When you look at, we are actually in the middle of a process right now in the financial industry where we are going to implement it's going to be complete in 2017, a pan-European clearing system for all share transactions throughout Europe. They went into testing a year ago. So the testing phase of actually implementing this throughout Europe is 3 years. And it is stepwise. So it's and when you see the plan is fantastic. That is where you see real testing in action, trust me.
What makes it fantastic, Heidi?
It's fantastic because the recognition of the importance, the risk of this not working. And it's something that the financial industry has done a couple of times. So we've done it in Nets when we introduced Dencourt. That really worked very well. When we did the what is called faster payments in the UK, that was the ability to clear transactions within 1.5 hours. So they went from 4 to 5 days clearing cycle to 1.5 hours, and that happened overnight. And it was actually also including every major bank in Europe. It worked smoothly. There was no problems. There was no defects. It just went. Yes, there was defects, but it didn't impact clients in any way. So the reason it works is because they've done it before. They recognize the learning that they have from that process is carried to the next one. And that's where the banks are, when it comes to those kind of implementations, they work really, really well together. There are no secrets. There are no hidden agendas. They are completely open and transparent. So I'd say And if you want to move that into organizations, it is about acknowledging we don't know everything. We will have defects. We need to be transparent, and we don't blame everybody. We take ownership in the process as well. And we've got a bit of a way to go yet until we get there. Because one of the added on challenges that we have is, even though we may as an organization be quite mature in our development process, the way that the work is done today in a global virtual setup means that we also have to work with significant different cultures, with significant different maturity levels in the way that you interact. So I'm very much transparent. I'm flat in my hierarchy. I'm flat in my communication towards my direct employees, the ones that report into me. But some of them will actually not talk to me because of my title. And I'm like, it doesn't really matter. If we've got an issue, come talk to me. Yeah, but I'm not allowed to talk to a senior director because I'm only a manager. So that's another part of the whole equation that comes into also dealing with defects and making sure that everything works. So when you get out there, I'm sure some of you are already out there, you will see that the culture is a big, big hindrance, challenge as well. Yeah?
Do you think there's a shift happening with people being more aware of the consequence if you're not testing properly?
Yes.
I mean, the clients must learn something too from watching all the others.
Yeah, there is a shift happening. Now, software development came about in the early 1900s. Testing wasn't actually introduced formally until round about 1972. That's where the first kind of model was described and developed. So it is happening, but it's just coming slowly. And people are starting. And I think that is also thankful to the agile way of thinking, that if we put 3 people together and we make business testers and developers work together, we get much better products. We get faster turnaround. It all goes better, it's cheaper. The trouble that we might have in those, and that happened to a bank in the UK that did purely agile development, was that the control of what was actually being developed kind of went in a different direction. So that wasn't too good. So eventually they had to close down and all their clients moved to a traditional customer. But yeah, agile is definitely going to help doing that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I didn't know banks went agile. They do.
They went back. I think Saxo Bank is using it very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, Saxo Bank is doing it.
Yeah.
This bank was called Egg. And Egg was actually a bank that was, I think it was in 2001 or 2000, it was a bank that was created by an English or UK-based insurance company, Prudential. I worked for them back in 2003, and they actually did agile development in that bank. It just went out of control. So,
so it's not really which methodology you use, but more the fact that you actually know to some degree what you're doing. Because it seems like a lot of the issues where it's like it's basically enterprise development. Nobody knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
Just totally goes well.
Well, the fact that we have something called methodologies today, we've got Agile, we've got a V model, we've got SDLC, we talk about Lean, Six Sigma, we talk about all sorts of different things. It means that someone sat down and thought, I'm going to put this into a process. I'm going to put, from start to finish, I'm going to define what needs to happen. You've got Prince 2, or ISTQB in testing. All those things are because people have felt the pain of things not working. It works to a certain extent. Communication is a huge element of that working. So if you can have the best defined, structured model, if your communication doesn't work, it ain't gonna work. So I think that the only industry where you find process working for the sake of process is in pharmaceuticals. Because they are driven by the fact that if they don't actually demonstrate what they've done, their products will not get approved by the FDA. If they don't get approved by the FDA, there is no business, meaning there is no revenue, and no point in staying in the industry. And testing in that industry is a different beast. It is really, really a different beast than what you see anywhere else. So if you're really process-driven, keen on making sure that you tick all the dots and squares and everything, go into pharmaceuticals. Because you'll have a field day there. Okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I guess for the rest of us, we learned a lesson about communication and culture. That's everything. And tools, good, but not everything, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Thank you very much, Heidi.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I want to introduce a former student at this school. It was located differently instead of Lyngby when you went to it, about 8 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
Martin came young and fresh just from the army, very structured, very disciplined in your approach to your studies. And I think you brought that to your career afterwards, where you worked for many years now as a test manager. So test management activities is the thing that you're going to entertain us with. And what Martin has is also the ISTQB certification. I think you have both the foundation level and test manager certification. So you know the book and part of the curriculum. So I think that's a good help for you when Martin does this presentation, and also you can use that situation to maybe ask Martin some questions, not specific questions from the certification exam, because I know you have said that you need to read the book just to get the words right before you take the certification. So that's not the focus today. No. But you have including questions and next break, 50 minutes or something, an hour maximum, right?
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, hi everybody. I've even developed the latest ISTQB exams in Denmark, so I've even taken it a step further. But now my current full-time employment has taken me away from all my extracurricular activities, so now I just focus on test management in the pension Denmark.
But could we get some free answers to the test?
If the money's good enough.
Okay.
Yeah, a bit about myself. I thought I was going to be a career Army sergeant for many years, but I decided to leave that and decided to become a programmer instead. During those studies, I figured out that programming does not come naturally to me, so my talents were to be found elsewhere. My first job after I was finished here was on a defense contract that actually got cancelled at a later stage due to a lot of defects in a system there shouldn't be a lot of defects in. But there I had the responsibility for all the requirements for this system. So I had to make sure that nobody changed requirements without me being involved. And I slowly transitioned into testing because all of a sudden, since I knew everything about the requirements and had the business knowledge and all that kind of stuff, then it was very natural to include me when we had end-user testing and those type of things. And when I got fed up with that, I moved into test management. And I've been a test manager in KMD and Danske Bank for a number of years. And 2 years ago, I signed up for a job at Pension Denmark, and very happy with that choice. Pension Denmark is actually an odd place to be when you think about IT, because it's a very small company. We're only about 110 people today. We outsource everything to local contractors, so that means all our development is done elsewhere. And the same with our testing. I am the team leader for test, which is a very nice title. Didn't come with an increase in salary, but I have 1 employee, but then I have, so it's a massive team. But right now I have 10 to 15 consultants working under me. So that makes, actually, when you include the consultants, then I have the biggest team in pension Denmark, which is pretty neat. But that all disappears in June when testing finishes. Then I'm back to my 1. I'll be running through these slides about test management, and I'll be sort of using my everyday life as a reference point. And the context that you must look at this presentation in is that right now we're busy changing our pension systems from one contractor to another. So it's basically like the banks changing the entire legacy system. We're just choosing one legacy system over another. So we're replacing with something else, but we're also customizing to such an extent that at the end of the day we'll actually have, if all goes well, then I think we'll have one of the best pension platforms in Denmark. It's going to be a very efficient platform, and a very highly automated platform, because we actually strive to have digital solutions to everything. We don't want paper to be exchanged between us and our customers. We expect them to do everything online, and if they can't do it online, then our customer service center is only a phone call away, and then they can process everything. And yeah, one of the innovative things we've done, we actually hooked up to central state-owned registry, so that we, for example, if you pass away, then we automatically pay out your benefits to whoever's left behind. If you are registered with a critical illness, then you automatically get your insurance paid out, whereas in many other companies, you actually have to apply for that insurance. So we do a lot to service our customers, and Torben Møller, who's the CEO, he also prioritizes that we must be a very honest company. So it's honesty and the brand that's important. We don't have shareholders, so the return on investment isn't that important compared to that. Wrong button. There we go. So let's kick it off. Why do we test? Well, we've heard Heidi's presentation on bad requirements leading to bad testing, and then at the end of the day costing companies huge amounts of money. Well, basically, testing is the period of time where it's gone through this whole construction period, and now we have to verify that the system being delivered is actually what we ordered. And we do this by finding, I think the books call it anomalies, because a defect is this one thing, but there can be stacks of other types of anomalies. So we test the system to see what kind of anomalies do we encounter, and then basically we can trace them back to see what went wrong. In my company, with the new pension system, we actually have a very good set of requirements. It's a massive requirement spec, but they are pretty defined. Of course, there's always space for improvement. They aren't perfect, but they're pretty good. On the other hand, with all our web-based solutions, the requirements there are very vague. They often our COO saying, we need this, and then he presents some idea, and then the developers sit there, note it down, and then they develop something. And then in testing, we find hundreds of anomalies because we don't feel that they've delivered what we intended. But basically, if you do your root cause analysis on these things, you'll find out, well, we never told them what the system was intended to do. We just told them, build this, and then they built that. In many cases, I experience it in my everyday life, then people expect me to sign off on systems and say, these are now ready for production. So they often come to me, Martin, do you approve of this solution? And I have to often return the question and say, well, do you approve? I have just tested it with my people. I've told you the quality of the solution. And if you think that quality is good enough for production, then you can push it. But I return it now to you. And that's going to be the constant issue with being a test manager, is that everybody thinks that you have the end sign off, and basically what you must do is always cover your own behind and constantly tell management that it's them that sign off and send it into production. We measure the quality and we identify the quality, and we document the anomalies, and then management decides what to do with it. I love that button.
Yeah.
How do we do it? Well, test management or testing basically is the same as a project. It's a project within a project. And in many projects you will also see that the test manager might be the deputy project manager. I've had that role a couple of times, so whenever the project manager isn't there, then I'm also in charge of the whole project, which is nice, because at the end of the day it's not my responsibility, so I can hand over the responsibility for the project to the project manager. That I've enjoyed for a lot of years. But now, for example, in Pension Denmark with this new pension system, now I'm also the project manager responsible for testing. We've taken all test activities and set up a project to handle that. So now I'm a project manager / test manager. And the basic reason why you think of testing as a project within a project is this next slide. Testing is a huge cost for a company. Basically, it's an expense where they get nothing in return except sort of a paper document telling them how good or how bad the system is. So it's a cost that you have to really think about. And when I say it's a huge cost, it's a good cost and it's a necessary cost. But basically a developer, he isn't a cost in the same way because he produces a line of code, and at the end of the day many developers produce a lot of code which ends up being a system that you can sell or whatever. A tester, he doesn't produce anything like that. He's there to demonstrate the quality. And that's why we have to make sure that the testing period runs as efficiently as possible, so that it costs as less, or the costs aren't as big. So we go through all the same cycles that a project might do, but we just have a different focus. We have our own planning cycle. This is where the test manager starts looking at things and starts sketches out his test plan. We have a preparation cycle. Well, I'll get into all the details in a minute, but we prepare for specification, not for testing, but prepare for specification. Then we start specifying. At the end of the day, we start executing. And then after executing, we compile all the results and complete the testing activities and produce reports and show quality and all that kind of stuff. Underneath all this, we need some infrastructure of some kind. These are tools, or in places it might be Word documents in Excel or whatever, but we need some infrastructure to test this on. And once the test manager is finished with his plan, he just continues with the controlling and monitoring activities. All these things are done by other people. Test planning. I'll run through all the blocks one by one and try and relate them to my everyday, to my basic day. He produces a test plan, and often we discuss the difference between a test plan and a test strategy, and you'll see that the test strategy is actually beneath here. In many instances, the test strategy and test approach are interpreted as the same thing.
I just want to interrupt and say, we only have test management next week, so they haven't struggled with the definition difficulties. But sharpen your ears now and listen to what Martin says, because next week we're going to talk about it, and it is often difficult.
And often companies, they mix up the terms test strategy and test plan. And that's why it's a nice thing that when you go to a job interview, then you can ask them, well, which framework do you rely on? If you rely on this framework that I've used here, it resembles a lot of other frameworks, but it's actually a framework made by Society called the TMAP. But basically, if you read through the ISTQB syllabus, you'll see that they use a lot of TMAP stuff in their syllabus. So there are a lot of one-to-one relations. But now you guys are maybe reading up on the ISTQB stuff, and a test strategy is something else. It's a high-level document, and not the test approach, which is called the test approach in ISTQB. But when you make your test plan, you start, as a test manager, you start looking at a lot of different a lot of different documents to summarize all the information there in a test plan. To figure out, so you're looking at what is the business case for this massive move of a pension system. I I don't have a classification high enough to be able to read the business case. I'm just told that we're going to save 100 crowns per member once it's employed, which is a nice lump sum. But I've read the contract. Nice big contract that's really customer orientated, which is nice for me. I read project plans. Of course, when I started the test plan for this thing, there were no project plans. I had to develop that parallel with. Corporate project models might be there. Again, with Pension Denmark, we're very process immature, so this wasn't there when I began. It came afterwards. So I don't really adhere by it. And then the company test strategy. Well, that was a prerequisite for all this. That was that I produced that document. So luckily I did that, and then I could start my test plan. Now this document is 1.5 years old, nearly 2 years old. So it's in a need of it has to be freshened up. It doesn't reflect what we actually do anymore. But hopefully I'll get time to do that at the end of this year or next year maybe. But the first sort of point of view, the first thing you should be looking at is how can we start testing as quickly as possible. And the first testing activities might be your static testing activities, review specifications, those type of things. Because that's where we heard that defects are the cheapest places to correct them. And we must plan testing at all levels, especially within. It's difficult for me because I have external contractors and the way they develop things is not maybe the way I want things developed. But the agreement that we have, I can't clobber them and say I need 80% unit test coverage, or if I just have to present some numbers on that, I can't do that. They deliver code, I test. So many of my test levels, they end or they start at the system test level. Anything beneath that, I have no control over it. Over the year or two that I've been there, we have matured our cooperation so that they have started introducing some formalized unit testing in some key areas, but hopefully that will evolve over the years. And just remember the test plan, it's going to live for throughout the project and must be matured accordingly. This is the content of I think this is what IEE 829, I think the specification is called, and this is sort of the content of a test plan. And just to give you an idea of what it contains, I'm not going to run through every bullet, but basically, if you traverse all these points, at the end of the day, you will actually have talked to all your stakeholders, you will talk to developers, you will talk to IT, you will have talked to a lot of different people, and then you would have created dialogue, and you would have. There are other things where as test manager, I sometimes feel I sit on a pedestal and I know everything. And then all of a sudden you start talking to people and figure out there are stacks of complications and risks I haven't identified and haven't included in my testing. So by filling out all these chapters, you actually cover, it's a very neat and structured way to cover all the aspects that could influence your test execution. Now, depending on your project, you won't need every single bullet here. You can cut some of them out, and of course you're free to do so. A lot of our web-based projects, we don't use half the bullets that are here, or we put them together into a single bullet called test environment or something like that, and then you maybe group some of these things. Staffing and responsibilities is always a good thing to have when you have external contractors, but staffing and schedule and some of these things are out of my hands in testing. They're handled in a different way in my company. So it's a good structured way, even if you don't use all the company, it's a good way to maybe use it as a checklist and then run through these chapters and think, what would you put in them? Who would I need to talk to be able to put information in there? Once you've planned, infrastructure, that's the next thing you need. You have to set up, you have to start thinking about test environments. In some instances, a test environment can take 6 months to produce one. Or there might be an 8-week delivery time or something like that. So it's good to think about this early so that you can order the environments that you need so that they're ready when you are ready to test. In my case, for example, workstations, you would think that's an easy thing. But I'm starting end user testing after Easter. And I still haven't got my workstations yet because the contractor is supposed to deliver the software packages that are supposed to be put on those things isn't ready to install the software packages. And I'm thinking, well, you're in system testing right now. Software should be finished. How difficult can it be? But that's just the way it is. Contractors never do it the same way that you want to do it. Yeah, you think about test tools. Which test tools do you need to support your entire testing infrastructure? And here I've just listed some of them, just to give some vague ideas. We use Quality Center, and others will use Rational or Microsoft tools or whatever. But yeah, at this level, a web service level right now, we're using SOAP UI to test our web services, but we might make a change depending on whether we go completely HP orientated or whether we focus on some other tools. But that is technology decisions. I'm hoping that I can, at a very close, or within the next few weeks, I can start releasing testers to focus on this instead of focusing on testing. I've hired stacks of people to help me out with this, but I've had to prioritize tasks and send them elsewhere. Test preparation. Now you're preparing to write the test specification. A good thing is test preparation can easily start before test planning. And it's basically get some testers into the room where requirements are being written, because testers can ask a lot of annoying questions which produce better requirements, and actually give the testers a better harness to understand what is the solution, what is the intended solution, so that they know when they're testing which anomalies are important and which anomalies might not be so important. In our outsourced system, I hire testers in at a rather late date, so that means they come in and they have a very short period of time to read the requirements, design specifications, whatever we have, and produce the test specification. And in many instances, you can feel that they don't really understand the concept, but they're doing a very good job at testing it anyway. But there are many instances where the project manager, who's our business specialist, will turn around and say, that's not an error, that's intended, or, well, we can't do anything about that now, so move on. Quicker you can get testers in there, the better. Along the way, you want everybody, or you want somebody to prioritize all your requirements. In my case, I have, 800, 900 contractual requirements that I have to test. And these requirements are then clustered into some process areas. I chose the solution that I had the business prioritize the process areas, because there were only 113 of those, I think. So at least they told me what is important to them. So now I know what is the critical path in the system. So I know when I start my UAT, I know which process areas to focus on and which areas I don't have to focus on, where a little exploratory testing might be the only testing activity I do in that area because I don't have the time for it, or it's not that important, you just have to see that this little thing works. Because at some stage you have to prioritize, and right now we are in a process where we're discussing with our major contractor whether we should start prioritizing, because we haven't prioritized with them yet. But that's where politics comes into things. One way of prioritizing their requirements, there are various ways, but I've sort of used a risk-based approach, and the way I've interpreted risk-based is sort of a table, something like this, where I've taken the process areas, and then we've mapped them up to some code complexity, so that we can see how complex is this. And then we've mapped it up to, or given it points according to business criticality. How important is it for our business to function? I've weighted it differently because this is very important. This is, basically this file, if requirement 2 is not implemented, then the business won't work. That's a very important requirement. How complex it is might not be that important for me. That's just an indication of, okay, I might have to put in some extra testing here because it's rather complex. But these two figures give a value, and then I can sort the list according to that value, and then I know where to start my test work. So I'll start with all the requirements that have the highest value and specify those first, and then work my way down the list. So a bit like a backlog. But again, this is just one solution. There are stacks of other solutions out there. people use, the story points that you can use in the agile world or whatever. But yeah, I'm looking forward to see if this will work, because basically I figure out whether this prioritizing worked once my end user test starts in 3 weeks' time. You then move on into test analysis, so you start taking all your requirements, and in our case we're looking at them from the end user's point of view, but of course if you're working throughout the V model, or both sides of the V, then people have different focus on it. All my testers are focusing on the end user. We're producing test cases that can be run by the end users. So that's how we're looking at it. So we're looking at how will they interact with the system, which screens will they be using for what, and mapping all these things up and telling them that this value should be found here and whatever. We've done it in such a way to explain it. This is the sort of, for example, a process area. So there might be 8, 10, 12 contractual requirements mapped into this. But this is basically how do you create a foreign company in pension Denmark. You have a couple of Polish contractors and stuff like that that have pensions in pension Denmark. And here they've drawn a diagram, and when I say they, then it was the business who did it with Deloitte, I think it was. There were the process consultants in this. And looking at this, I can see that there might be 2 basic paths. There's this path, and basically it's drawn incorrectly because this always happens before that can happen, so this should actually, this is just one path. But then there's another path here that I have to look into. So there might be 2 paths between the systems. So what I've done is I've written 2 test scenarios. One where we go all the way through, the success scenario, and then alternative scenarios. So I've basically translated all these into use cases or system use cases so that I can easily adopt them to test cases. And I've also got the business to prioritize those for me. And during that piece of work, I could then figure out, then we could find out whether the testers had understood their requirements, because then the business would come back and tell us, well, that scenario, never going to happen. So throw that into the garbage. Once you've made all your scenarios, and you then start producing test cases. And the way to test cases, here's like using your test design techniques. And as I said, there are many more. I've just listed the 3 common test design techniques. And again, you cluster these together in such a way that if it's a high value requirement, you might want to use decision tables combined with another test technique to make sure that you have thorough coverage of that requirement. Whereas something very low, you might say boundary value analysis is all that I need to figure out whether this requirement is fulfilled. Yeah, and of course you also need test cases for your performance stuff and stuff like that. That's where I hire another load of external consultants to do my performance testing and security testing, for example, because we know nothing about it in pension Denmark. At the end of the day, as it is with me, I've been planning for 1.5 years now, and after Easter, I finally execute. So those thousands and thousands and thousands of testing hours that I've been billed will end up in test execution. Now I see the value of everything that I've done. Very excited, because 1.5 years is a long planning cycle. But in test execution, you execute all your tests, and you log all the results, you log all the anomalies, and this is what we use Quality Center for. We execute everything in there, we log everything in there, and then we have a complete repository showing us the linkage between everything, so I can quickly identify which requirements are very defect heavy, and I can see the requirements coverage, so how far along am I according to the schedule that I put down, and all this kind of stuff. Management tools are very important to manage testing. And at the end of the day, I have a log where I can present all the anomalies, figure out what's left at the end of testing, and I can evaluate these results and figure out what is my recommendation. And at least with my company, I of course come with a recommendation whether to go into production or not. And usually we test managers are pessimistic, so we always tell them I wouldn't do it. But then of course management looks at these things and they turn around and say, well, we have to do it. even though that there are 1,000 known bugs in this system, we have to throw it into production because the potential loss of revenue is so much bigger. So that varies, and yeah, I'm of course excited to see where I'll stand and just before the summer vacation when my end user test ends. End user tests aren't supposed to find anomalies, it's actually just a formal sign off, but as we all know with these massive projects, they're going to find stacks of stuff because end users use systems in a different way than technical people do or testers do. So crossing my fingers that I can go on summer vacation. As I said, test control, all this will be happening on top of all these test activities. So maybe in the initial stages I'm measuring how many requirements are now in test design. So I can see how far is our progress there. I can start measuring how many test cases are we producing on a daily basis, if that's that kind of figure that's important for you. But you're basically monitoring throughout. It's not just test execution, but you're just making sure that everything's running on track so that you have everything ready before you start test execution. And along the way, there'll be stacks of hurdles that have to be overcome, and those hurdles will result in you adjusting the test plan or changing scope or going to management and saying, I have to cut scope somehow because I won't be ready with this if I also have to take care of this. And initially, you might be able to lean up against the requirements prioritization, but later on, there's always something that you have to ask management for permission to cut. And then at the end of the day, testing's done, systems in production, everybody's happy. I've sent all my consultants home, or almost all of them. But it's a good idea just to sit down and have a talk. What went well? What can we improve? Especially in a very process immature company as we are. I'm really looking forward to these sessions to figure out where can I put more value into my value chain and make sure that my test strategy is still an efficient test strategy where I can have a better dialogue or whatever with our development contractors to produce at the end of the day better quality and better test results and all this kind of stuff. So these are important sessions. I still have project managers that choose to send all the consultants home and then we sit down and do this ourselves because as they say, if we have 10 consultants in a room talking about this, that's 10,000 crowns we're throwing out the window. They don't see the value in spending the 10,000 crowns that way. Where I'm hopefully we can mature before we get to this point. Otherwise, I'll just have to do it under my own wings. Yeah, and once you've evaluated, chosen your next steps, all your testware, you start moving that into your. In our case, I'll be handing everything over to what we call it. To the maintenance department, or whatever we call it, who maintain the systems on an everyday basis, so that they have all the testware available, so when we make future releases, or new updates, or add new requirements, or have to look at what didn't we include in the last release and all that kind of stuff, then they have all my testware so that it's recyclable, can be used again. And when we hire new consultants, they can see the context that this was built in, and then they can quickly adjust that context to whatever little project we'll introduce in the future. And that's the end. I thought as a final teaser, I'll just show you my current, what do you call it, test progress monitoring. So this is live data. You won't get a copy of it, but and all your iPhones keep them packed away and that kind of stuff. Especially those. Because I'm wanting a different type of information, I've chosen to take the data out of Cognizant and put them into Excel, and then that way I can sort of manipulate data into some nicer reports. This report is, for example, test execution. So this is the current contractor's test execution, and you can see this large purple lump. We want this to be as small as possible by the time we reach the end date of testing. And as you'll see in later reports down here, we expected this to be a bit steeper, and it isn't as steep. So that's, again, test management going into effect. I'm going into management and telling them, well, they aren't going to be finished on time. What are we going to do about it? This is what we want the graph to look like. We want it to be as green as possible. And then if you look at the top here, you can see that along the way, all of a sudden they've removed test cases for some reason. Then they've added a lot of test cases. There was a peak there, which I can't explain. I call it an Excel anomaly. But that's test execution, for example. This is the defect train right now. So, well, this is the nice, if I remember, yeah, this is the nice area. This is all that stuff that's closed. So they have about 300 defects in the system. 175 of those are closed. That's a nice thing. But when you start looking at the gap here between what's open or to be tested, all these other colors, that's the stuff that isn't closed. You can see that it's growing, and you can see that the distance between closed and open, or all the open, is also growing. And that's a tendency, of course, you expect that at the early stages of testing. So there's nothing alarming about it. And at one stage you will see that everything breaks, and then the gap becomes smaller. And right now it's not breaking yet. So we know that there's still defects to be found in this system. And again, having an end date not too far out there means that we prefer to see the break now, and then it goes down rapidly, but that's not happening. So again, management issue. There's a problem here. We might not meet the end date. What are we going to do about it?
So basically you're going to talk to yourself about it because you're both the project manager and a test manager.
Yeah, well in this case it's such a political project that I'm going to my COO and my IT director and saying, here's the data. But they knew this from the beginning because they have so much focus on testing right now that we have weekly status meetings with the contractor so that we actually have the CEO attention on it. And that I can feel is a huge help on my side because whenever I tell the contractor to do something, then they know that, as I joke around, I have a small hammer and a big hammer behind me.
Yeah.
So I have the IT director that can hit them in the head with the small hammer, and then I have the CEO who can hit them in the head with the big hammer. This is this shows you, these are all the process areas that I have to go through, and this shows you test status per process area. So at the end of the day, we want everything to be green. And here you can see that they're all over the place, testing everything at the same time. Hopefully something or more that will become green in the days to come. These are the trends right now. As I said earlier, open defects, you can see that it's still growing. So we haven't reached, it hasn't leveled yet. This is just another way to present the above graph. And then if you measure on how quickly they are executing tests, then you can see here that, the level of no run, they should, this is also a good management graph because it tells them at the current execution rate, they executed every single test case by the 5th of May. So that gives us an idea of when they're done. But then if you look at the pass curve, you can see that at the rate they're passing these test cases, meaning that once they've executed them, they might find errors or there's some infrastructure that has to be sorted out or whatever. So it's taking them longer to pass the test case. So you can see here, by the time that they've passed these 2,200 test cases, we'll be in July, August. So all of a sudden we realize that, they might be able to put more people into the room to test and then cut this curve down. But they might also need to put more developers into the machine room to make sure that this can accelerate even more. But I present data, and then other people run around with their hammers and make sure that what's needed to be done is done. That's test management for you in the real world. Oh, that's one way to do it. As I said, I can't remember if I said it at the beginning. There are many ways to execute test management, and there are many contexts to execute test management in. So you have to adjust it to that context. And I haven't done test management in Agile, for example. But I know that test management in Agile has to be very different to how I handle these classic waterfall projects that I work with on a daily basis. But it's the same tool set that will be used. It's the same ideas, it's just a question of scale. Any questions?
when you did the evaluation of the report when you executed your test plan, you said you would probably say it's a no-go to production, and they would say, no, we need to push it through. Would you then have a kind of some red flags, say, okay, but if you're going to go into production, you need to fix these, or how do you handle that?
Usually you will, in any production scenario, you will, or at least with big systems, you will end up with a number of defects that you'll say, okay, I realize that these are very critical, but we can't push the production date. And for example, in the case of this new pension system that's going on, then the production date, my CEO has told the entire world that on that day we'll have the most fantastic pension platform in Denmark. So we can't push the production date. We know that we'll hit the production date with a stack, with a whole lot of known defects. And of course, the most important ones of those will be handled immediately afterwards as a release. Unless the defects are so critical to the main part through the system that we say, okay, we have to move the production date. But yeah, there will always be defects that you prioritize and say, let's make a quick fix. Or quick fix, I don't mean a very quick one, but I mean that you think about it, correct them, and then move them into production so that we have as few problems as possible. Great thing about a lot of the pension, a lot of these processes is that there are manual processes behind it. So if the automated process in the system doesn't work, then we still can fall back on our paper and fill out forms and send forms backwards and forwards and type things into the system in other ways. Did you also have
just to see if I understood it correctly. So you have all these non-run tests. So pretty much you have already written all the code. Someone have pretty much committed code for a use case, and you're only testing it now to actually see if it works to meet the actual requirements, right?
Yeah.
That seems like a slight issue that has not been done earlier.
Yeah.
I'm not criticizing, but just
No.
why is this the case?
In my case, I am only responsible for the end user test. Everything else is done by contractor. In the case of the new pension system, a big issue is that when you build your systems, if you want to test things early, you have to build them so that they're testable.
Well,
and this contractor built the system in a way that it wasn't testable. They actually had planned to start testing, I think it was May last year, and we did a first round of tests in May, but then after that the system became untestable because there are a lot of, it's complex code and there are a lot of building blocks that have to be put together, but they were built in such a way, in such cycles that they didn't complement each other. So it took a long time to reach that point. And I'll agree, it's not the best way to do it. You would want to test as soon as possible. And they had all the best intentions to start testing a year ago. But reality hit us and they just weren't capable of executing that type of test before.
I'm just asking, the reason I was asking is because I've actually experienced the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's very frustrating.
Yeah. It is. And that's why I'm also laughing a bit because I had contractors telling me, or my testing contractor telling me, but we shouldn't find defects in the UAT, in the end user test. It's a formal sign off of the solution. And I said, yeah, well, system this big, 2 months of system testing and 2 months of end user testing, we're going to find stacks of defects.
Is it because you've been more, or the ones who build the system have been more architecture driven than functionality driven? I'm thinking the shorter cycles where you're driven by user requirements, like for instance Agile could help you. So you don't have these components that cannot plug together. And
I think what you, basically if we look at the core of the problem, it's an old mainframe development house that's the contractor. And as it is with many big companies, everybody works in silos. And they've never handled a customer like us. So they don't know, they don't have these, their corporate project model isn't ready to cope with this kind of structure that we dictated in the contract. So they've been working in silos for so long. And it's taken them a very long time to figure out that we have to merge these silos earlier. So it's done very late.
yeah, so it's a very waterfallish approach.
Yeah.
Used to.
Because they had plans to introduce 4 phases so that we could actually test a phase at a time and then move to the next phase and test that and move to the next phase. And then they would have a complete system test at the end of development and then a complete end user test that I'm planning. So the ideas were there, but real life took us in a different direction.
You said you've been part of this project for 1.5 years.
Yeah.
And at what point did you get the code to make it available to the testers, like the actual code?
I won't say a fully operational test environment, but we got access to a test environment in August last year. But the system is, I'd say, it's not more complex than so many other systems, but it is a complex system. But there are mainframe batch flows that have to work. These do all the math. And then we have a user interface that's built in Silverlight, for example. And behind the Silverlight, you have an enterprise service bus that handles all the communication to the mainframe. There's stacks of components there, and even in there's stacks of components because you have the accounting module over here that handles all transactions. Then you have the outgoing money, you have the ingoing money, you have the insurance policies, you have the pension profiles, you have the pension policies, and all these things, and they all have to be put together in such a way that you can actually test things end to end. So we've been able to make small sort of hit and run tests and sort of, this button works, okay, but we can't see the effect of that because the batch or whatever that was supposed to handle that transaction wasn't operational yet. So you couldn't, yeah, so it's always been a little part of the system that we've been able to see.
And before this period of having the code, what was the main focus on? Was it making test cases by having these requirements in contract?
Yeah. And while we've been testing, we were also, because the system wasn't testable, then we just focused on more and more on how can we improve the end user test, which we are responsible for. How can we make that as efficient as possible?
And what kind of tools did you have so you could actually make this without knowing the code?
Well, that's been a big problem, and that's the test cases have also evolved over time because in the beginning the test cases were very high level, and were basically you must be able to adjust your insurance policy that way or this way, but we didn't really know how to do it because we couldn't see it anywhere because that wasn't developed yet. So we've written high-level test cases. I think some people call them logical test cases. And then as the functionality has been available to us, then we've reiterated the test cases and gone down and said, okay, now we write a physical test case. What is it you must do? Click this button and do that, or whatever. Or adjust this up, adjust this down, whatever it can be. And it's an expensive way of doing it. But that wasn't our intention from the beginning.
Once complete, once you deliver the product, what is your job then?
Good question. My COO told me a year ago, Martin, just so that you realize that you're sitting in a position that will be cut will be cut when we go into production. And we had a good laugh about it. But no, I hope. But basically we are a process immature house and we want to become more process mature. So I see my personality is also, I think test management is interesting, but I'm already looking what is my next career move. And I don't see myself as a test manager in 5 or 10 years time. I'm working towards processes instead. I want this testing process to be as efficient as possible. And Pension Denmark is a good place to do it in because I can get the budget if I can give a good enough argument. So we're not afraid of investing in this kind of stuff. So I think when this goes live phase 1 goes live in September, phase 2 goes live in March next year, so I still have a year left on this project.
So you're still testing in phase 2, let's say?
I start phase 2 testing in October, I think.
Okay.
And that will continue until March. But once that's done, then I'll start looking at where, the test model Pension Denmark 2.0, what is that going to look like? especially because we choose outsourcing. So that means it has to be a model where I can hire a contractor from, or hire a tester from somewhere, and put them into this model, and then they're efficient from day one.
And what is the consequences if you don't meet, let's say, all the test cases, if you don't make them? Is there any financial consequences?
Yeah, for the contractor.
Okay, not for you?
Sad. No.
Okay.
In my case, on a personal level, yeah, I get a yearly bonus based on some project goals, and if they are not even project goals, they're personal goals. And if I meet those, then I get my bonus. If I don't meet those, then I don't get my bonus. But
I meant more as a team.
Yeah. No, there aren't any financial incentives in this.
Do you personally think it would be easier to be a test manager in an agile project development cycle than in a normal waterfall?
That's a hard question. I've never been a test manager in an agile thing. I think it also varies from a company's adaptation of agile. There's some that work with the theory that you don't need a test manager in agile projects because what is he supposed to do? But others work at saying, well, there might be a corporate test manager that produces the corporate strategy and the corporate guidelines or the departmental guidelines for how testing is supposed to be done in agile projects. So I think a test manager will be more centralized and maybe more process orientated than he will be operational in a project.
Yeah, but still somebody has to make those nice graphs, right?
Yeah, but in agile projects with the huge automation, I'm not sure if Christian is going to get into it, but if you have all the right tools and you hook them up in all the right ways, then this data is produced instantly, and you can quickly show it up on a dashboard. And yeah, I've tried to introduce this dashboard idea in Pension Denmark, where they could just log onto a SharePoint site and get all the graphs, but not working. My CEO still prefers to get a mail daily telling him what's the status. So, final.
When you talked about end user testing,
yeah.
Then you have some users testing, and let's say they find some critical flaws that is not corrected before release. Do you take something like trust to the system into consideration when you test? Let's say that the user say, okay, I would not trust this system if it was sent into production in its current state. Do you take it into consideration when you report that?
The gut feeling is very important, and it must always be there in your reports, because well, I haven't experienced it on myself, but we have a bit of it today in the current major project that we have here. Our gut feeling is that this system is so immature that we see difficulties in it being delivered on time. But the test data also supports it to some extent. But the contractor says, but the test data is wrong. Let's give you a good gut feeling. So they're putting a lot of effort right now, and as we speak, there's a huge meeting going on at the contractor where they're demonstrating the system so that they're showing us the system is a good system. And we know that they're excellent developers, and the system, we know it is it's been functioning without problems for years and supports stacks of insurance providers out there. So it is a good system report. But the gut feeling right now is that it's not good, or there are problems. But and that's what test data is supposed to do. It's supposed to actually enforce the gut feeling and say, my gut feeling tells me it's a good system, and voila, see.
Yeah, so happy to ask all these questions to get the experience from Martin, but I'm looking at my clock and see that we're running out of time. But it was great hearing some concrete information and concrete project, and also you referring to the book stuff with the ISTQB. So you gave us both more foundation and more reality. So thank you very much, Michael. It's going to be a bit difficult for me to do it because I don't know Christian very well. I know Christian through a guy we both know from LinkedIn, where I looked at your CV and I could see it was impressive. And I also just heard in the break that you're also involved in certification and you have a lot of experience in testing. And you can see maybe also from his clothes that now it's not the business suit and tie, so we are not only moving at CIO level, we are also where I think a lot of you like to be, where it's a bit more tool-oriented, more executable, and maybe also more agile.
Time for the main attraction.
So it's the main attraction. You always take the main attraction in the end. So it was also on purpose I put you in the end, actually. And what Christian just said was, why all these PowerPoint slides? We can just do it on the fly. So we just decided that you control the show now, because Christian can take it all in.
I'll just present some of my daily challenges for 2 minutes or something like that, and who I am, and then we can go about talking a bit about automation. At first, I've worked in just about any kind of business you could imagine, except through mobile, but medical and military and stuff like that. But we can go about. So I have these 2 advanced test levels. They bring you absolutely no value as a tester. It's a good piece of paper for getting a job, but you won't get any better at anything, depending on the classes that you take. Some of the courses you actually learn stuff and it's nice, but the paper itself is only for getting your next job. Period. No discussion about that. Then I'm a certified agile tester. That was a waste of time. I knew everything in advance. It's actually just the test approach for being a Scrum Master, which I'm also. It's again, you can read it in a book. It's not something that you have to, but it's a paper to get you a job. I have been testing and developing, primarily testing and test automation for more than 10 years. I worked in large teams and small teams. I worked on public projects as a consultant, or like the waterfall approach, and I worked in Agile. And then during my time as a consultant before I started at Oticon, I worked in medical, directory, was cracking in Nero. I worked in telecom, defense, and some maritime assignments. And mostly test automation. My current environment is a bit more comprehensive than others. We have, since 2011, we have 20,000 plus different kinds of hearing instruments that we need to support. We still support any Windows platform, including Windows XP, so that's kind of a hassle. We support all your laptops, all old PCs that you can think of that can run Windows XP. We have to, because we ship CDs with our software to Chile twice a year, so it has to work for them as well. We have all our regression testing that we need to support the old platform, because since before 2011, we had other fitting software for adjusting hearing instruments that needs to be working, including the new one. So it has to switch between the different modules. Very advanced, actually, and we some of it is old C code and some is C++, and the new stuff is .NET and C#. So it's kind of a mess, but we handle it. We also have different programming devices. Just to explain to you the challenge, we have some kind of a PC, could be any, and then we have up to 5 programming devices which are connected, maybe connected because we also have a wireless programming device. And they may be connected to 1 or more hearing instruments, not more than 2 because we have an upper boundary there. But this might be wireless and this might be wireless. Most frequent, this is wireless compared to this one. But again, we never know, and we have 5 different of those again. So it's, as you can see, this all adds up, and our application has an infinite amount of pass-through.
I was just going to, thinking, does everybody know that Oticon has hearing aids?
Yeah, we make hearing
aids.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So it's, I'm trying to say, but working with money is simple. Compared to this, and we have we have 2. We have a high volume market. We worldwide, I think it's is it 50 million people who has acknowledged their hearing loss, and we have a fierce competition between the 6 biggest brands, and 3 of them are from Denmark, so that's nice. It's Oticon and Videx and Resound, which is GN. So. And of course, it's safety critical because it's a medical device, so we have to think about that as well. So we have to cover all our requirements and prove that we are covering them. So it's kind of and again high volume. And we have 2 major releases, and then we have some big tenders. Tenders is like a chain. It could be the Veteran Affair in the US, which sells hearing instruments to the soldiers. So we have to cover them as well, and they have special needs. And we deliver to them twice a year. So that's my current challenge. But to you, what would you like to hear about? I'm open, because none of you are doing medical devices, so doing it generally, I guess that all of you are kind of developer oriented and would like to code stuff, I guess, more or less. So I had a plan. I didn't know who you were, so I planned something in general. What we can do, you can ask me anything and we can make a small list and we can go through what we would like to know. I was thinking about starting with some automation and then how we do it in an agile, or actually we're not doing true agile. I've done agile before, but we try to do agile, but we have these 4 releases which states that they're set and carved in stone, so that's not agile. Because we have to print that CD or 2 CDs and ship it to Chile, so we cannot change it. So therefore it's not agile. But that's just me. So yeah.
What does your application actually do for the hearing aids? When you see somebody with a hearing aid, you don't see them with a laptop running around.
I can show you. We have this emulator, so I don't need to have all my equipment with me. There we go. Just take that one. That should work. So now I've had this service which is emulating a set of hearing instruments and a programming device. So, and it's just when the wire goes, we have the laptop in here in the software. When it goes to the wire, it just make a different turn to our little Windows service. So that's basically it. So all the normal use of the code, except the communication part, is the same. That's why we can use it, but we cannot use it for getting regulatory approval. So. But I'll just create a new client. I need first and last name. There we go. Now I have a client. Then I can select a different hearing instrument. We have different families. All of these are not new ones, so that's the whole legacy part. We also have the board, which is the really old stuff. So we will just, or we can go directly to detecting a hearing instrument. Damn it. This never works when you're doing a demo. Let's see. Just have to detect my programming device. This was running. Should be running. I can do this on the fly. It's made for testing purposes, so it should be. So we gave up. That's a nice message, isn't it?
I'm sorry I gave up.
Yeah, I gave up.
Deal with this.
Why? It worked yesterday. So. But I tend not to use the GUI, so that's no communication. That's okay. But I can give you a briefing. We shouldn't spend too much time on this.
Just to clarify, what is it that you're actually updating the hearing devices? Is it some kind of firmware or?
No, settings.
Settings.
Yes. The whole instrument is built up. We have well, it has memory. and for that we have made a memory map. So the current in production used memory map, how can I put this in a way that I'm allowed to? It's the size of that is can be expressed as a 5 megabyte XML file. So you all know that that's kind of a big XML file. So it contains tons of settings, and all of these are bounded by business rules or audiology rules, because we have to make the sound compressed in a certain way so the brain can easier adapt to the hearing loss. So
when you do a new release, is it an improvement of the settings, or what is it actually?
It's new features. This is when you are a tender or an audiologist and you sell hearing instruments, or you work at a hospital fitting hearing instruments for patients. You work with this tool or the competitors' tools, and you make this. If my emulator were working, we would be able to see that we had some curves here representing how the gain setting of that instrument was set at the moment. And we would also be able to if we created a true client, which we actually could, we would also be able to see how the hearing loss is. So the hearing instrument can compensate for that hearing loss. So you'll see a curve representing the hearing loss, and you'll see a curve representing the gain setting for that particular frequency.
Okay. So when you actually do an update, it's only on your app or Mini or
well, usually when we make hearing instruments, we cannot take stuff back from the market. No. So when we make something, we make sure that it's tested very good. For instance, last release I ran some automated testing through this piece of software, fitting software, and directly on the instruments. I tested the 20,000 plus instruments emulated twice, and automated. I think it was just below 300 hours of continuous testing. And if you should have done that manually, every single test run would take roughly 5 minutes, 10 minutes, including some setup. So return on investment was huge. I could keep my job if I just did that twice a year. Actually, I could, if there was a calculation, I could double my pay. So automation is also about proving that it's good for business, because we would never ever be able to handle that test load manually. We calculated it as being 3 or 4 man years. We have to do it twice at least per year. So you have to have 8 guys doing nothing but that, and it's kind of boring. So yeah, but that's my environment. And what I do when I automate is that I have a tool called Test Complete, which I guess that no one of you knows, but it's the second biggest test tool in the world. From my point of view, there are 3 good tools for testing Windows applications. There are actually only 2. There's the HP, which is very expensive, and then there's Test Complete from SmartBear, which is not so expensive. I think a standalone license is $2,000 per year. Compared to what it can do, it's very cheap. And if you're doing web projects, this Selenium for you. It's free and it works very good. And some of you might think that why I'm not mentioning coded UI. It's because it stinks, and it does. We had a trial for that, and I can tell you that this button changes state when I click it. It goes to being hidden. It's not uncommon probability or property to set. And then, but coded UI, all singing on there, dancing free with your big subscription with Microsoft. The button was hidden, I cannot find it, but it's there. Now it's visible again. I cannot find it. That's coded UI, and it's also depending on, for instance, this select client. We have a multi-language application, so we might want to test this in Japanese. Coded UI cannot do that for you, so it's kind of a hassle. So that's why I'm not talking about that tool, but we tried it. But then when do we have any questions? That's something that you would like to know, something that you have. Yeah?
Can you say again what was the good one?
The good one for web or Selenium is free, and it got tons of extra add-ons. I worked with it when I worked at Crack, and we did some really cool stuff because you can do just about anything. You can make some simple capture replay, which is fine if you don't want to spend too much time, or you can export it to just about any known programming language, and you can actually the easiest one is exporting it to Java, and then you have this Selenium grid server which can execute or spawn multiple clients up for you in a grid, and then you can test the hell out of stuff if you do it correctly. But if you would like to do that, then you need to apply some advanced techniques, which is a bit, well, they're not really covered in the ISTQB stuff yet. They will be in the expert level. But then you would like to apply a model. But it's if you're a software developer, it's actually very simple because it's a state machine, and we can talk about this if you would like to. And this is actually what I'm working on with this right now, just in another tool. So we have this modeling tool where we draw the state machine, and we have actions, which could be click on this button, and we have a verification where I would verify that whatever action I did went well. So then I could, I'll start by making this model. And I need a starting vertex. And then I'll have some action, could be whatever, some action, and I'll have a verification. And just for being nice to the audience, I tend to start it with a v underscore something, and verify stuff, doesn't matter what, like this. So this is a small model, then we could just go to end. And that's also just for being nice. Actually, the only mandatory part of this is the start vertex, and for going out of the start vertex, you need to apply an action. But it's not all the edges here or actions that are all the edges that needs an action. They can be blank. But for instance, if we would model a Windows calculator, for instance, that's a good example. I would make a model with start, and then I would open the calculator. And I would verify that it's open. And then I would go to a state where I can return without verifying it that it's open all the time. But for instance, just for being nice, I could verify display present. It's just a verification that it's not crashed. And then we could kill this, and we have the end. That seems easy, and you think, oh, this is not enough. It's just open there, but it's a start. If you could make this work, you can also do this. We'll do it like this. We'll press plus because it returns to the same state, right? And we'll just for making it simple, we'll press any number. So now just, or it could be any arithmetic operation, but you see the point here that this is actually a very simple model, but the number of tests that you can extract from this is already infinite. So, and actually, to go about it and be correct about it, it's checks, because this is not testing, this is just checking. But that's a whole different argument. But what I'm working on is actually making small models. I worked with model-based testing a few times before, and the way that it's working really well on complex systems is that you use stops and drivers. And you take this technique and you apply that. So, but what would that be? Well, the stops and drivers are like just in unit testing where you set stuff up. So a driver in this context would be that I set my tested application in a state so I can test my model, because having this, not this one, but another very complex model will be an death to maintain if you have changing requirements, which you have in Agile, or changing user stories. So you use a driver to keep it in the state that you would like to test. And that's then it gets very simple. And for instance, Selenium or any automated tool that you would like to can use this. So there are some free tools on the web. I use Jet, which is a German modeling tool, and I use a tool which is also used by Spotify. I guess you know that, but they use a guy on Spotify is doing the tool. It's called GraphWalker, and it can traverse these different graphs, and it's working rather well. Depending on how you use it. When I use it with Test Complete, I need to manipulate the output a bit. So I've made some small application which removes all the unnecessary stuff for me, because I also have guards and some operations for calculations and stuff in the model. But it's actually very handy, and you can use this in an agile context, because when you have the ability, for instance, a web page, you can kick that up in the state that you would like to. Usually you can anyway. And you can give it some dummy data which enables the functionality to be working, and then you have the web page up and you can test all the functionality after a model, and you can test everything. You can make this go for 100 hours or 100 steps, and you'll find all the bugs that you would like, or that your model can find for you, and you can do that without even watching. And then you can, of course, you need some kind of manual check on this, and I'm not really a fan of all that making test cases. It's very boring. Reading requirements, that's good, but you could, if you have good and nice requirements, you could just test directly from the requirements, or you could read the requirements and make a state emission for you. So this combine is actually very combinable with exploratory testing, which we're also using.
So are you recommending going directly from requirements to, for instance, state models like this?
Well,
and then executable state models.
If I wasn't in a medical environment,
yeah,
I wouldn't bother making test cases, because when you have a well-formed charter for exploratory testing, that's sufficient. Because you also have, if you have well-formed requirements, you can test directly from that. Because a lot of times, when I was as a consultant before I started Otscon, I was on some public projects which of course failed. That's what they do. But a lot of time, writing a test case directly from a requirement is adding the word in the end, verify. And then you have the requirement text. That's it. That's what you do. If you have good requirements, they are so clear to any thinking person that the only value you could bring is that word. And I know that people don't agree, or not everyone agrees, but there's a common trend that writing test cases might not be the best investment in time. So
Okay, let's try to dig into that, because a big deal of this course, of course, has been to do test case design.
Yes.
But let's try this path. Say good requirements and go to exploratory testing. Let's go that road.
Yeah. Okay.
What is good requirements that can be used without writing test cases?
For instance, it could be a sequence diagram. That can be sufficient. It all depends on what you need to test. It could be the design specification. We have these specification which states how the business logic for a certain feature should work. And if we should make a test for that, which should be an extraction of actions, do this, to verify that in the end. If we should make that test case, that would be interpreting the requirement, which might give you a possible failure, because the test case is written, the requirement is written, then it's interpreted into a test case. It's perhaps even interpreted by a developer to code. They might not have the same idea of what's the wording of the requirement. So it might not be that the code is wrong, it might be that the test case is wrong. So by having good requirements, or however you form your requirements, but making your user stories, your UML, your requirements text testable in whatever way that you can, and eliminating the written test case will remove a possible failure or a possible defect, because testers make mistakes as well. But in some cases you have regulatory boundaries for doing this, so you have to for instance, with the medical devices, you have this Food and Drug Administration from US, which if you do anything wrong, you might lose your total American market. It's not just that product; it's everything. So you can have some boundaries there. But if you're doing a web application for directory site, for instance, there's no need for you to have specific cases, test cases, which is just a representation of the requirements. And why would you ever write one test case covering one requirement when you can go and read in your requirement and you can think, I can do this in once, I make this mission on my charter and just write a few ideas, and then as you put it in your pile of charters, and when you should start testing, and you should do that right away when the code is mature enough for you to test. And then again, there's a bit of difference of opinions there. Whenever you have some kind of interface, you can test it. It might not be that you can put a traditional tester or checker to do it, but the developers can test as well. So it might just be that you as a developer had coded some stuff and you have this SOAP interface to it. That's enough. You can make a test for that. You could easily automate it. It would be very much easier than doing it manually. And you can just, we have the requirement, I have this mission, I'll code it. Then we don't need to do it again. And using a different tools, for instance, that model-based tool or classification trees, test case generator, you can make tons of test cases, which would be a lot better compared to a manual tester which knows nothing about anything technical, coming in later and trying to check this, because you would have been able to regression test the hell out of this feature 1,000 times before the checker in the end hits it. That's where my opinion about what testing is a bit different.
You just killed the V model at least.
No. No, I'm just saying that the V model is, well, it doesn't say that you have to have written test cases.
Okay.
So it just says that you have tests, and having a requirement and you have tests. When you of course you need to prove that your stuff is working, and that's why you can have a charter for a requirement. And it's just, of course you have to prepare. We're not monkeys. Nobody wants to do monkey testing. Some people say that monkey testing is well, sit down, use different stuff. No. My interpretation of a monkey test is when you call in 10 people from the street and say, you can do this. If you have taken the time to write that detailed test cases, you have wasted a lot of time and a lot of money. But still people do this.
But how do we get the high quality test automation? I was just want to do a parallel to, for instance, database design. Of course, when you get into being an experienced database design, you don't need to think about the normal forms any longer.
No.
So you have them just as part of your backbone without you thinking about them. When do you get into that state that you can make high quality test automation? I mean, without thinking so much about the test design.
The only quality of an automated test is a positive return on investment. So if you make a test, I made a test which took me 15 minutes, and it ran for more than 100 hours, and then I discharged it. It's a brilliant case for automation, but I cannot go about working 15 minutes for every month or something like that. So I need to do something different as well. But the whole idea about what's a good quality automated test is one that makes sense to run. If it doesn't, you need to. Well, we can also get a bit into the pesticide paradox here, because a lot of automated tests test the exact same thing, the same time, or every time it's used. Also, that is done by manual testers as well. So that's why model-based testing actually makes more sense, because you can set this up to do, it's sort of a pseudo-random test, so it's following your model and applying all the rules there, but it doesn't necessarily do the same thing every time. So testing you're running your automated suite in whatever application you need to, but doing it a bit different every time, testing your boundaries a bit differently, because the history of going from point A to point B is different every time. That will bring you better assurance that you have that you don't have any that many bugs in your system compared to just testing the same thing every time. Because if you just test the same path every day, well, nobody makes mistake in that path, because everybody knows that it's flagged at once. So making some kind of using models and not doing the same stuff every day makes more sense than spending a lot of time reading requirements, writing test cases in a system that you do not know. And actually, when you get to know the system, in order for you to write that test case, you need to explore. Because nobody can read a requirement. I saw the requirements here. I wouldn't be able, at any point in my career, I couldn't read a requirement and write a test case without having to just take a glance at this. So I would, if I prepare myself and then I read the requirements and I have my domain knowledge, then I can test it. But I don't need to write everything down. It doesn't make any sense. But of course, during my test, I write notes, comments, stuff that I find, ideas to new charters. And when I end my session, depending on the length, you make your charter into a small report, and then you debrief with your manager. And in that case, manager might not be as the guy before, because what is a manager? I've been a manager once, test manager. That was well, that was just all the management part is actually quite boring. But doing the whole test approach and thinking up stuff how you can test the hell out of your application is more exciting, and that's actually much more fun than just being a manager and wearing a blue shirt like they all do. But we have a test lead instead, and he is the guy responsible for what we test is good enough. We also have a test manager, but that's just for personnel things. We as a test team are responsible for finding a way to make this work, because our manager, tester, he has very little knowledge of testing. But all the testers, we are recruiting high-value testers, not checkers. just testers, people who know their stuff. We like people who can code a bit. That's not mandatory, but you need some skills, technical skills, because it's not just, testing is not just sitting, oh, that went wrong. It's you have to know stuff. You have to be able to read the requirements. You have to know the technical environments and what can go wrong, what might be good to test, get ideas and test it right away. It's not just that whole waterfall approach which will go wrong in the end. But when I debrief with the manager, I have made my charter to I'll remove all the negative comments, basically. So all the things that shouldn't go any further than me or my manager can, or my lead can hear them. But all that is which is not meant to go to the management of the project. We'll remove that, and we'll also get some new ideas for testing other stuff. And then he is responsible for taking that on and making the prioritization of our pile of charters on how we should test them. So that's how we do it. And we try to test continuously, but we're only 14 testers. 4 in Denmark, 2 in Switzerland, and the rest in Poland. So we are not that many, but we couldn't never keep up if we had to go with the traditional approach writing test cases. We have test cases, but they bring very little value. The last release this winter, just before Christmas, not I, but some of the testers, we also have some student testers or checkers. They ran we have 1,500 or 1,000 or 1,500 test cases, which are maintained by one of the Polish testers, poor her. They found 4 bugs. 4. That's how much value they gave the second time we needed to run them. This is the second time. It's how much value was that? And all these. I can go on forever about this, but because it made absolutely no sense to run them. It was a waste of time. But we found roughly 300 bugs in total. So 4 out of the 300 bugs were found by traditional test cases.
But we haven't talked in this class yet about exploratory testing
no.
and neither the concept test charters.
Okay.
So maybe you can explain that.
Yeah.
In general terms, what is exploratory testing? I mean, it's more emerging trends within agile projects, so I think it would be interesting for the class to get some info about that.
Yes.
Here it is.
Here it is. This is very brief. Well, exploratory testing is basically, well, whenever you get your hands on your application or your system, whatever it is, you start exploring, you start playing. That's the beginning of exploratory testing. But it's actually just, it's a life cycle of testing. So you get an idea, you create a charter. I'll get more detail into what a charter can contain, but then whenever you have your charter pile, which is more than one, and you test your charter in a session, and in the end of that session, depending, you make that charter into something that you can hand over or you can debrief about. So, but the whole idea is that it's only sufficient amount of documentation to test what you need. So here, having this test approach requires much more skill as a tester, because all the things or the test techniques that you can apply, you have to know them by heart. And it also makes it a lot more fun, because you don't have to spend 3 months every 6 months to just go clicking in an application. So, but of course you have to be able to repeat your charter, but again, having this only sufficient amount of documentation and being able to repeat it goes directly to the point of you have to be qualified. You have to think, you have to know your business, you have to know your testing. And if you are a developer, and you should know the application and how it's done, so you can find the breaking points in that application. That's the whole idea, to find bugs. So a test session, it is a period of time where you are uninterrupted in the ideal world. But that's the theory. But we try to. It's very hard not to get interrupted. In my office, we are more than 100 people. So you know, we are all these big offices. But you try to remove yourself from any disturbance. Not at Oticon, but when I was a consultant, I was the client where we had this piece of red paper with testing written on it. And we hang that on our lamp at our desk, so we were not to be disturbed. And people knew that it was for an hour. A session can be longer or shorter. And then, of course, you have your, as the previous slide stated, everything that you produce out of that session must be reviewable, so you can debrief with the guy managing or the girl, the person managing the testing. So it doesn't have to be a manager, but it could be anybody with that role. It's just a role. And of course, it has to be charted. It's like a map and a mission, what you should do. And then, of course, it's time boxed, because you can only keep your concentration for so long, and it's very individual, and it's also very individual per company or product, how long time you can spend focusing directly on that particular feature. So it can vary, but the important thing that is that you're concentrated and you're uninterrupted and you have a clear mission for what you would like to test. So, but it's only, again, what's sufficient. It's just what you need, but it has to be clear enough to hand over to any of your colleagues. But that colleague has to be qualified as well. So it's that whole circle of life that you have to have good colleagues with domain skills to be able to do this. But you can, as a tester, developer, or whoever, get an idea. We need to get this tested, and you write this mission down, idea down, so you can get this feature tested, and you have some other stuff that when you're doing this might be good to look at, but it has to be well formed in a readable way, so you can hand it over. And then they get prioritized, like any test is. They're not all equally important. Actually, if you go in the real world, every test is important, but that's not true. And then, actually, I think I'm pretty done with this, but then again, it has to be something that you can hand over and you save them. And you are allowed to change a charter or create a new charter from another charter, because you get an idea which is, well, we need to test this sort of thing in this area as well. You create a new charter for that, containing that sufficient amount of information that you're able to test it. And it's not how. Well, it can be how, but it's not necessary. It's just that amount of, if you make, I don't know, if you make this web page, everybody working on that web page will have some basic knowledge. So it's not necessary to write everything down. And that's the whole point, that even though the color scheme change or the theme change on the website because it's bought by a new customer, you can use the same charter. It's not that big of a deal. It's just sufficient amount of information. So during your exploratory testing session, it's, well, as I previously stated, it's very important that you are focused on testing and you're doing that charter. But again, when you're done and you are out of ideas, you may conclude your session, because if you're in a place where you say our sessions is 90 minutes plus minus, well, you might have run into something which is the third time that you tested this feature and it's not been changed that much, so you cannot find a lot of bugs, but you find some different stuff, might not be bugs, but just observations. You cannot spend the whole session on that one. So you'll terminate your session, debrief, and go to according to your agreement with the guy or girl or person managing the session, the whole sessions, you debrief in the way that you agreed, and then you might get a new session planned. Or you have other stuff to do. It could be if you're a developer, you go back to coding. That's fine. But you need to keep track of everything, every little thing that you find or observe or think is funny or just annoying. You keep track of that or keep notes. And some of your stuff might be written down in a way that shouldn't pass on to the management part. But again, it gets more individual what you think that you need to write down, so you have to practice a bit. But the whole deal of this is that when you have your charter and you write your notes, you also write the bugs. Of course, when you write a bug, we all know that you should be able to state how you reproduce a bug. So that's a very important part of this. It's not part of the theory of exploratory testing. But if you write a good description of how to reproduce a bug, it will be easier for the developer to reproduce it and fix it. But that's actually not a part of exploratory testing, but it's a thing that I've used, and it's making a whole lot of sense. So during your session, you test, you learn, you take notes, you design whatever you're going to do next, and you test some more, make more notes. It's an iterative process, like software development. You don't know everything in advance. But the important thing is that when you're done with your whole session, you have some notes and you have some learnings, you have some ideas for other tests, and you can say, this is done, we'll never have to touch this again. It might not be true, but it can happen. And you might not be able to spend the whole session on one charter. But the idea is that you do one charter in one session. I'm not sure that I agree, but the whole world thinks that that's good enough, so I will follow them. But one session, one charter, and then when you're done, you can provide no new information about that feature. You start again. You terminate your session and finalizing that debriefing with your manager. So, and how you manage this is, well, you find, depending on what environment you work in, you find the best way to set aside time for your sessions. So again, this is not a methodology which is carved and set in stone. It's what fits best for where you are and what you are doing. It might be that you can check something in 15 minutes, and that thing that you should test is done. Then for that thing, 15 minutes is fine. It's the whole idea about not spending time on something that's unnecessary, because unnecessary stuff doesn't provide any value. So the whole thing about exploratory testing is knowing the context of what project you are in, so you can identify what the customer desires or requires, and how much testing is actually needing to be done. Because not every field of technology is the same. So it differs. So it's, yeah, well, it's just what makes sense. We tend to use 90 minutes, but it's actually some features are very hard to test in 90 minutes. So we have to go a bit further, or we will split some of our features up into two, because they may, even though it's the same code that we test in the application, it's split. Well, it's used through two different screens in our fitting software. So we have a charter for each. It's what makes the most sense for us. So, but again, it's basically all the same. It's all about that you need to when you stop, when you don't have any more things that you can find, don't have any new information, cannot find any new bugs, you stop and you debrief, talk about what you should do next. If you are a true tester doing nothing but testing, you'll probably get a new charter after a break and a coffee, because you have to regain your mental health. But if you're a developer, you also have a break and a coffee, and then you'll go about your other stuff. But it's not mandatory that you need to be a tester to do this. It's not mandatory that it's only developers who are doing this. But it requires more skill than doing not exploratory testing. And actually it makes a whole lot of sense in a lot of places that developers are doing this once in a while. It's not like I'm saying that you should do this and partout doing this, but it makes sense that if you have done some code that in an agile team, that and you might have a tester in that team, but the tester takes a look at it and says, seems fine, but nah, you think, I might have forgotten something. I'll do a session. We have a buffer for sessions, for instance. You'll do a session, you found some stuff, or it could be that your colleagues coded something and you knew, the guy was having a bad day that day. I'll take a look at it, because it's all about, in agile projects, it's about the team delivering what's required. Quality is a funny word in that sense, because who knows what quality is? It's only the client who knows what quality is. You can code the most stable application in the whole world and it would stink in the eyes of the customer. But it's a different discussion.
Is it manual testing you do in exploratory testing, or is it automated?
Well, it depends. But it might not give you any, for instance, if you would have this input field. It might not give you any value to test that manually, but you can in a session with some of with some tools and some skills, you can make a small script that takes 2 minutes, and then you execute 1,000 iterations, just increasing the input, and you'll find some bugs that the developer didn't think of. Or you can, there's still people making of this and this. It happens. What was it I saw in my when I worked at Croc, there were even a place where we found a bug where they took it was a web page, so JavaScript, when you get an input, it's just characters. So they forgot that the input took the numbers as a character. So we find some funny bugs. So but you can apply automated testing, but in a session. But then it's just the quick and dirty test that you like. But it might be that you actually can save them. But the whole approach is finding some quick method to find bugs or identify bugs. Because just testing different boundaries. Because boundaries, when you think of the different data types, a boundary is not a boundary, because this will give you that's a very, very easy boundary to find. But for instance, if you should test that this character is bigger than this integer, that's in web pages represented also as a number. So that's a bit different. That's so doing a normal boundary value analysis might not give you the bug on that one. That's also things that you need to know about. So, and that's where your development skills brings value to testing, because not all testers know about data types. So it's all about the context that you are in. And actually a whole wave of this context-driven testing is rolling over parts of the testing world, and it's not a big battle yet, but it's getting there. And it's all about what makes sense, to see what your project is in, what it is that you're coding, because just applying some approach that you read in a book and you're certified in some level might not bring that much value into a project, because it's just a web page. So it's all about getting the context right. Who is the customer? Who is the client? What is it that the client desires? What is your requirement? Even though that I'm working in an agile project, I'm a believer in agile, I still think that having requirements in a good way is a cool idea, because user stories might not be that sufficient. I'm experienced that often is the developer who who actually writes the user story in detail. How did he do that? That should be the project manager, but it happens that developers, because project managers don't have all that much time, so they just pass it on to interpreting the requirement or whatever need, how they email, whatever, by a developer. So that's the developer's mind of what the client desires. That seems kind of off, but it happens. So that's why having good requirements makes a whole lot of sense still. And it's very costly, but you shouldn't have them more detailed and more perfect than the world that you're in. So if you release every 6 weeks, you might not want to spend a year on developing your requirements. You should find some other way. So perhaps a flowchart or a sequence diagram in UML, whatever. The format is not important, but the testability and the time-limited stability of requirements are important. So.
Time's about up. So
Okay.
we need to just, if you have more questions, I think.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on test first?
It depends on what you think of as test first. You think about writing a unit test first and then code. Well, it depends on the guy writing the unit test, because developers can write a lot of poor unit tests, not testing everything or anything at all. So if you apply knowledge of testing to that methodology, I'm fine with it. I think it's a great idea. But if you just write unit tests for all the positive criteria for making your piece of code work, it's simply not good enough. Because you can think that you test everything, but you know it's all about combinations. You can make stuff fail pretty easy. And having that insight in the code, and then apply a little bit of combinatorial skills to that, you might get different results in your unit test than you expected. So test first with applied testing skills is a great idea. I'm all for that. But if it's just for saying that I tested, I have 100% statement coverage. What a load of statement coverage is absolutely bull. It's nothing. If you should go for anything, you should find the important parts and then go for path coverage. Because just covering a statement, it won't give you all the bugs in the system. But again, you cannot make full path coverage on everything, because that's an infinite amount of tests. So you should go about making, how should I say it? You should modularize your system, so you have these models where you can test the interfaces instead, and then making sure that the interfaces are tested good. But whenever you have methods within that interface which have no interaction with the outside, you should try to test the hell out of those, because then you are pretty sure that the methods communicating with the interface or through the interface are more error-prone than with the communicating with the interfaces. Yes.
Do you use marks in your tests, and if you do, when do you do it, in which way?
The developers do. I'm not at the moment not working with unit testing. At the moment, I'm only making through the GUI. I don't have time for anything else, and we are, I don't know, 200 developers in just making that application. So it cannot be everywhere. But they use mockups. Yeah. So a lot of them. Actually, I think we have I don't know 100,000 unit tests. And the unfortunate thing about this is nobody knows exactly how good they test. But given that medical is a fear-driven business, we need them to run, so they are maintained. But the true coverage, well, we might be able to find a statement coverage number, but again, it gives you absolutely nothing. about, well, you tested a statement, but you know, a statement can have more than one more than one outcome, and that's not tested or proven in statement coverage.
How do you identify the complex paths that you want to focus on?
Well, mostly out of business criticality. So our communication part is tested more than other stuff. So things that we can easily do through the GUI is not that well tested. It is also we have this layered. It's very layered application, so it's actually very hard to test. And at the moment, we're splitting it up into more modules in order to be able to verify that it works as intended, and not that it's got the right quality, because we don't decide the quality. Our users decide if it's a good or bad product. We try to make new features, which is nice. But we also have 5 fierce competitors making stuff also. So what's quality in that sense? But so we try to verify that we cannot break, that our modules works as intended, and even though that we make changes in other places in the application, that we do not crash or do not have failures. So that's but we don't have anybody. Not in the fitting solutions that I'm working in, don't test from time to time. Developers must make unit tests. It's a requirement for them. They must partake in the testing phase. We have, given that we have these 4 releases per year, the 2 major ones, we are also pseudo waterfall. It is waterfall, but we are trying to do agile within it. We have sprints and with Scrum teams and stuff like that. So we have these boundaries as well. So given we're starting, we have retest iterations, for instance, this coming up this spring, and we are also make the developers test, because we cannot test everything ourselves. But we're using more and more exploratory tests, because the developers know the stuff better than they would. It would bring less value if they needed to follow our interpretation of the requirements and the GUI. So we are trying to do more and more exploratory tests and verifying this. And then we have the student testers and some of the checkers in Poland that are executing our 1,000 or 1,500 manual test cases, but they are only done because management is afraid that if we don't do them, we'll find something serious. But we check it anyway, but we could, you know, it's the proof of that's actually being important here, because we need to prove that it's working every way. And that's a very hard business. But when we find a way to come about automating those 1,000 test cases, we'll discharge them. The fastest thing we'll ever do is making them go to the trash can, because it's a way. It's time-wise, it's a waste of time. 4 bucks, 1,000 test cases, or 1,500. I don't remember. I don't execute them, so I don't remember. But we found 300 bucks or in other ways of testing. So that's not good value.
You always work in pairs with exploratory testing?
No. It depends on what you're testing. We have our communication part, which is very complex, because it has to support that whole many instruments and programming devices, and might be wireless, might not be wireless. The guys doing that work in pairs. But they are also so skilled that they actually have I would say the best code, but the code is so complex that it has to be tested. It's a nightmare. But we spend quite a lot of time doing that. So.
Yeah. That's about it, I think.
Yeah.
That was great listening to that, getting some experience from the outside world, from a more programming-oriented angle than the other guest lectures, right? So thank you very much.
You're welcome.